Today marks the 11-year anniversary of 11/11/11, and what gift was greater than what the 11th day of the 11th month of the 11th year gave us? Of course, I'm alluding to the critical horror thriller masterpiece 11/11/11.
11/11/11. That's when it all goes down.
Okay, jokes aside, it has been 11 years since the release date of Skyrim, and I think we are quick to forget how old this game is because of all of the re-releases that have become a meme over the past few years. But Skyrim came out when consoles like the Wii, 360, and PS3 were still the shit, and everyone was saying,
"Lift my scooter outside the dairy, next minute."
I mean, regular show and Adventure Time were only on their third seasons. League of Legends still looked like ants fighting over Doritos. Everyone was obsessed with Party Rock. Nelson Mandela and Margaret Thatcher were still alive. Habib and Conor hadn't made their UFC debuts, and for my UFC guys out there, JDS would knock out Cain Velasquez to become the heavyweight champ the day after Skyrim's release. The last thing I will say is that the amount of traditional phone users compared to smartphone users was roughly equal back then. My point in saying all of this is not just to make us feel old, but also to point out how mind-bogglingly well Skyrim has held up, especially when you look at how long ago it was released, and the fact that it's 2 generations behind in terms of consoles. Not 1, but 2. Even with Skyrim being a game that has been picked apart thousands of times on YouTube, I thought it wouldn't hurt to examine this game, especially on its 11th anniversary, since 11 seems to be an important number when talking about Skyrim. So without any further ado, let's talk about what we can learn from this incredible game 11 years later. Skyrim was my first Elder Scrolls game, and back when I played this game on the PS3, yes, I know the PS3 port was horrible, but I wasn't even old enough to drive, and the only way I could get my hands on rated M games was through my brother, who is 10 years older than me. The reason why I played Skyrim was because my brother bought it, and he played Oblivion as a kid, so he was more familiar with the games than I was, and he bought into the Skyrim hype train. After both of us played Skyrim, it was clear that I was far more enamored than he was, and this is probably because I was a kid, so I had a lot more time back then. This was also my first real open world Bethesda game, and prior to this, the only open world game I'd really sunk my teeth into was San Andreas. I would go on to play all of the Bethesda classics later, but the original game that I played, with Todd Howard's reputation on it, was Skyrim. The reason why I'm saying all of this is to show my connection to the game, because I know some older fans look at Skyrim as the weakest Elder Scrolls game. And I can see where they're coming from since I've played the other games now, but back then, Skyrim was the first game I played, and you can probably imagine how blown away I was and how attached I became. Skyrim does a lot of great things. Nowadays, when we look back at it, a lot of people like to criticize certain elements of this game, but don't let that distract you from the stupid amount of things this game did well. I'm going to focus on 5 things this game did great, and how these helped the game stay relevant even after all of these years. The first aspect I want to start with is how much freedom Skyrim gives its player. This should be pretty obvious given the game is a sandbox open world RPG, but this still deserves some recognition. When Todd said,
"That mountain is not just a backdrop, you can walk all the way to the top of that mountain," he
wasn't lying, even though he has a tendency for not telling us the full truth sometimes. But Skyrim offers so much freedom to its player, and it trusts you to be able to have fun with the world itself. If you want to be a fisherman, blacksmith, werewolf, or even a vampire, you have all of the tools at your disposal to do that. You don't need to follow the main questline if you don't want to. You can play the game however you want, and this is a level of trust that most games lack even now. This is the best part of Skyrim, and this is what a lot of critics of this game don't seem to understand. Skyrim is not meant to be a game where you tap into this amazing plot with so many twists and turns, and then it turns out that your character is the main villain the entire time. and then you sit there dumbfounded in your chair, absolutely blown away by the story of the game. Skyrim isn't meant to give you a story. The game wants you to create your own, and this clicks with some people, and with others, it doesn't. A lot of people like to compare Skyrim to The Witcher 3, which I'll dabble more into later in this video, but what they fail to realize is that The Witcher 3 gives you Geralt's story, whereas Skyrim gives you the tools to make your own. This level of freedom is something that no other game really did during 2011, except for some other Bethesda RPGs and maybe Minecraft. But this trust that Skyrim has with the player to encourage them to explore and discover things on their own while offering them a rich experience to do that in is really unparalleled when it comes to other games, especially of that time. The other thing that Skyrim does so well is that it gives you the perfect world to pair with this freedom. And this leads us to the second aspect I loved about this game, and that is the world building. The landscape isn't monotonous like other games, and there is a lot of variety when it comes to Skyrim's world. I know a lot of people were worried that the whole map would just be mountains, but Skyrim gives us a beautiful, layered world that has enough detail to feel alive. There are so many rich locations in Skyrim that aren't really seen in any other type of game. Places like Blackreach, Eldergleam Sanctuary, Sovngarde, Azura's Realm, the Throat of the World are all examples of how Skyrim gave its players scenery they hadn't seen before. And by the way, this is only the base game. If you bring in the DLC, there are so many other cool locations. But considering this is the 11-year anniversary of the base game, I'm going to stick to just that for this video. The game also has so much detail with every model of an item being able to be examined in the inventory, and I feel like people are quick to brush off this level of detailing. There are also so many books that the player can read that add on to the lore of this game, and a lot of these books are actually worth reading and they offer genuine insight into the world. There are even tiny details like the Thieves Guild symbols that are scattered throughout the world to indicate danger or other meanings. The list goes on, but Skyrim is chock full of little details that show how much care and attention has been given to this world. The third thing I want to talk about is something that goes hand in hand with world building, and that is immersion. This is also as good of a time as any to address a relatively newly formed criticism of this game. In recent years, a lot of people have started to call it Skyrim for being shallow or not super immersive, and to be honest, I can completely see their point. I feel like the older Elder Scrolls games did a better job of fully immersing the player, and Skyrim's approach can feel formulaic at times. But what these criticisms often fail to take into account is just how old Skyrim is. The common comparison people like to bring up against Skyrim is The Witcher 3, but that game is 4 years newer and came out on a whole new generation of consoles. Also, the scope of The Witcher 3 is not as big as Skyrim's, so while The Witcher 3 may be more immersive at times, we have to factor in the sheer size of Skyrim along with the complete freedom that the game presents you, and that is something that is truly unparalleled even now. So when we look at this game in the context of its time, I wouldn't say it's shallow. The game could definitely have some more unique aspects to make you feel more impactful, but basically every game can improve in this regard, so it's not an issue we should hold over Skyrim exclusively. When it comes to the immersion though, Skyrim has the basic fundamentals in place for the player to feel immersed, and these three fundamentals I would describe as customization, choices, and atmosphere. The game really hits the nail on the head for all of these, with the skill tree being one of the highlights of the game that suits the majority of playstyles. I say majority because the speech tree is complete dog shit in the game, but besides that, most playstyles are executed to near perfection. You also have the various standing stones to help you feel even more committed to your playstyle. This game also gives you valuable choices to make, and this can completely shift your playthrough. And by doing this, the game not only adds a level of importance to the player, but it also encourages replayability. The atmosphere is incredible. There are beautiful locations like I mentioned earlier, and the soundtrack from Jeremy Soule makes you feel the Nordic inspirations behind the game, while also adding tension and relaxation in all of the right areas. So with these 3 criteria executed so well, it's pretty clear that Skyrim is an immersive game. The 4th element I want to talk about is how Skyrim understands that the player needs more narrative than just the main story. This may seem obvious, but people want a story and a purpose to adventure, and this game gives the players the option to do that outside of just the main questline. I would say Skyrim's main story is not the best out there, but we have some amazing quests sprinkled in the main story that can compensate for the lack of a powerful plot. The Thalmor Embassy quest is still one of the best in the game in my opinion, and going down to Blackreach for the first time is an experience that none of us will ever forget. We also have other quests that the player can do outside of the main story, and these quests are oftentimes better than the main quest line if I'm being honest. The Dark Brotherhood, Thieves Guild, Companions, and even the College of Winterhold have some really nice moments, and each Daedric artifact is an absolute blast to obtain. The reason why I'm bringing this point up is because a lot of games tend to focus on the main story but then not offer much else. I mean, just look at Fallout 4 without any DLC. After you get past the main story in Fallout 4, what are you going to do? Minutemen Radiant quests and settlement building? You can only do that for so long. Skyrim, on the other hand, has so much to do besides just the main story, and it really feels like the main questline was just the tip of the iceberg when it came to the content of this game. And here's the beauty of it. Because there are so many things to do, after you spend all that time playing through everything, and you eventually make a new character, and then play through the quests again, they feel fresh because you get back to them after a while, and you go at them with a completely new playstyle. This is the reason why Skyrim is dubbed immortal in my opinion, because you can beat the game, then set it down for a few months or a year, then come back and give it a go again with a brand new character. And there are so many playstyles that you could do this an absurd amount of times, and the game still won't feel redundant. But while we're on the topic of Skyrim being immortal, let's talk about my last key point about this game, and that is the mods. I said I would limit myself to the base game, but we have to talk about this aspect because Bethesda from the very beginning openly gave modders the creation kit and they understood the importance of modding that came with their games. This transparency and support for community creation really paid off as they gave players of the game essentially free DLC for a lifetime. I'm not going to get into specific mods, but the fact that Bethesda understood the importance of modding, unlike other companies, really shows that their intention with Skyrim was to make a game that could be enjoyed even after all the DLC dropped and all of the base locations were explored. This was ultimately the best investment Bethesda made, as they trusted modders on websites like Nexus and the Steam Workshop with free reign on their game. The modding scene is undoubtedly why Skyrim is still able to compete with games today, because each flaw of the game gets solved by some mod, while also adding in new content the base game never had. But the real highlight here is how Bethesda gave full access to the community, and even though that might seem like a very common sense business move, many companies today are still stingy about their code. Skyrim has taught us the player's autonomy should be celebrated, and that games that prioritize this should provide adequate tools for the player to further shape their own playing experience. What I find interesting is that Skyrim for me has always been a jack of all trades. Now sometimes people think of jack of all trades as a backhanded compliment, but I don't mean it that way. Skyrim is a really good jack of all trades, but it's not the absolute best in anything it does. The story in BioShock is better. The choices in Mass Effect are better. The combat in games like Monster Hunter and the Arkham games are way better than Skyrim's. The stealth in Splinter Cell is better, and I would say the immersion and quests in New Vegas top Skyrim's. But Skyrim is still so damn good at everything it does that it reaches a sheer scale that none of these games can match, with the exception of New Vegas maybe. But still, the shining point of Skyrim, compared to these other games that I mentioned before, is that it gives you the option to dabble in all of these areas, whereas these other games specialize in these areas. This freedom to choose is not there in other games, and this is the key aspect that distinguishes Skyrim. For me, the exploration and freedom of Skyrim go hand in hand to create an unforgettable experience. But what's also a bit ironic is that Skyrim came out on Veterans Day, a day dedicated to celebrating the brave men and women who sacrificed their rights to protect our freedoms. The reason why I bring this up is because the main thing that separates Skyrim as an elite is the same thing that 1111 stands for, and that is freedom. Let's enjoy Skyrim's anniversary, but more importantly guys, let's not forget our vets. But there you have it, some lessons we can take from this masterpiece of a game, even 11 years later. Guys, that's all I have for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and please let me know your thoughts over Skyrim and its legacy in the comments below. This video took a long ass time to make, and I was rushing trying to get it out today, but it looks like we just made it. But if you could show some support for this video, then that would mean a lot to me. And as always guys, thank you, I love you, and I know you're probably seeing this after 11/11, but I still hope you find the time to give back to a veteran.